Welcome everybody to the live coaching session on mastering the report writer and do forms. Today we're going to go over using the report writer tool. My name is Anthony Trani. I'll be doing the demonstration for you today. I'll be your live coach. Today we're going to go over the specific example of having a daily timesheet in which your employees would fill out their clock in and clock out times for the day. And we're going to walk through how you would set up a weekly report or a daily report or a monthly report even that consolidates all of your employees into one report, so that way you can get everybody's clock in and clock outs and total times for the week or the day or the month or whatever it may be. So as you can see on my screen here, I've just started up with a daily timesheet form. Essentially, all this form is filling out some supervisor information, a job number, different regions. And then I have my employee hours table here, in which it has a drop-down list of all of my employees. Currently, they're displaying all of them for me, so I can just go in and pick different times of the times that my employees clocked in or clocked out. So this specific form would be a supervisor that's on site that's maybe clocking people in and out. And as you can see, the total hours for that person came through, as well as the total hours for the entire group for that day. And then there's some comments and a supervisor signature. So what if you needed to get a report every week of all of these employees' clock in and clock out times for that week? Well, currently in DoForms, when you go to generate a PDF, it only gives you an individual PDF on an individual submission. If you want to consolidate this information, you need to use the report writer tool. So I'm going to jump here into the portal to the Build Reports tab. So this is our main building area of where we're going to build reports. So I'm going to walk through the steps here down on the left-hand side, but before we get into that, I just wanted to show a quick example of a report that's been created. So I created a report earlier today, and basically when you set up your email schedule, you'll get little emails that look like this, where they have a click here button where you can download the report. And I just want to show a quick example of a consolidated report. So as you can see here, I took last week's clock in and clock out times for my employees. I grouped them by a job number, the supervisor, and the specific date. And you can see it lists out my employees here, their clock in times, their clock out times, and the totals. So this is the end result that we're trying to get to today. So I'm going to jump back over to my build screen here, and let's walk through it step by step. So the first step here is we're going to pick a form down the toolbar. Now, a good rule of thumb when going through and building reports is follow the steps in the toolbar step by step. You don't want to jump right to your email schedule. Start at pick a form and gradually work your way down the report. And as you go down these different tools on the left-hand side, it kind of makes sense as, the first step is you're picking the form and the data that you want to include in this report, the headers at the top of the report. And as you go down, it kind of builds on itself. So starting with pick a form here on the right-hand side, these widgets in the Build Reports tab work the same as if you were in the Build Forms screen. Each one of them has its own set of settings on the right-hand side here that you can go down and tweak as needed. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pick my project, and I'm going to pick that daily timesheet form that we just reviewed. The next field that pops up is a table. So within the report writer allows you to combine information from a form. It's individual fields, meaning fields that are not inside of a table container. And it also allows you to include information from one table. So I'm going to jump over to the View Data tab here. I filled out some sample data. And as you can see here, there's a couple of different supervisors, job numbers, regions. But basically what I'm referring to when I say individual fields and table fields, these fields along the top here, supervisor name, ID, job number, etc., are all individual fields. These fields will be available for you to check as you go through and include them in your report. But when we say table fields, we're actually talking about a table structure within the form. So in this form, it's called employee hours, and it's got 4 columns. So if I wanted to include this information into my report, when I jump back to that Build Reports tab, I need to select the table name that I want to include. So I'm going to select employee hours. You can see underneath the table field, it has those individual inputs. So the supervisor information, the job number. So anything that I want to include in this report, I want to check off. So I want to include the supervisor's name, his ID, the job number, the region, the date. And that's it for now. I'll leave the comments, the day of the week, and the total hours out. Continuing down the list here, we have date. So now this field is the most important field when setting this up. This is telling the system how it's going to filter through all of your submissions, and it's telling it what records to include in your report. So by default, we have create date, which if selected, when you set a range or a daily, weekly, or monthly, this date is telling that report how many records to include. So if I choose create date and my date period was today, this report would only generate records that were submitted to the system today. Same concept or if I did last week. This report would only include submissions that were submitted last week and have a create date of last week. Similarly, you don't have to use create date. If you have date and time fields inside of your form, you can also use those. So for this example, I'm going to choose the date field that is in my form. So if I jump back over to my data that I have here, just to point out exactly which field I'm pointing to this field right here, the date. So that's the actual date that the employee is on site and filling out their time and things like that. So I'm going to jump back over to the reports tab here, and I'm going to say, let's use that date field. And for this example, I filled out a bunch of information from last week. So last week would run, the default setting runs from Monday to Sunday. But for my example, I only had submissions from Monday to Friday. So I'm going to go down to custom here, and you have two different options with this. Custom can mean either where you're picking a begin date. So January 14th would be the beginning of last week, as you can see here, and the end of the week would be the 18th. So I can come in there and I can also say January 18th is the end. So now I'm telling this report to only include information where the date field inside of the form was between the range 114 and 118, 2019. With that said, you can also uncheck this use date range option here and use the enter end days before setting. So this is very useful for people whose work weeks might begin and end not necessarily on a Monday or a Sunday. So some people's work weeks end on a Wednesday, and it's Wednesday to Wednesday. So with that being said, you can use this end days before, and if I were to enter 7, this is going to go back from today's date back 7 days and include any information that was submitted throughout those 7 days back. So basically, if I were to run this every Wednesday, it would go 7 days from that Wednesday backwards and include all the information for that week. So the end days before, kind of, you put in a number and it just goes back that amount of days and includes any information that meets the criteria there. But for this example, I'm going to go back to the date range and have it be January 14th to January 18th, which was all of last week. Please note that the report writer's date ranges can only be 31 days. So at most, you can run a monthly report. And then you can see here the different types of tools that are supported in the reports themselves. So the only thing that's really not supported is things like media. So, you can't include images or signatures or things of that nature in here. But moving down the toolbar, now that we finished the first step for pick a form, I'm going to go to the report header. The report header is exactly what it sounds like. It's a header for your report. So you can come in here and add different text. You can add images, add your logos. You can put on your color scheme, change the orientation of the report. There's all different types of settings that you can put in here. But to keep it simple, I'm just going to say daily time sheet report. And I'll keep it to the left. And then you have some different options if you want the date or the page number or the date and time. These things can appear on the left and right-hand side borders of your report. And you can change the appearance settings as you go through to match your company's colors and things like that. Moving on to the next option here, now that we finished the report header section, is data filter. So data filter is not a required field that you need to put in, but it's there if you need it. So what a data filter allows you to do is allows you to take a set of data and filter it down to only include a specific, let's say, region for the report. So if I jump back over to my data here, you will notice that I have some different job numbers. So you can see there's a job number 7,000 and a job number 9,000. And there's also a couple of regions, or south and north. So if I wanted to create a report, let's say, that I only wanted the job number 7,000 to be included in the report, I can come into my filter field here and say job number is equal to 7,000. Now this report, even if it finds, let's say, 50 submissions for the date range that I have selected, it's then going to do an additional filter to only pull out those records that have the job number equal to 7,000. You can have more than one filter, and they can be and or, meaning it needs to be 7,000 and the supervisor needed to be Anthony. for example. But you can kind of play around with the filters and filter down to get the exact data set that you're looking for. So for this example, I'm going to remove the filter out as it's not required. And I'm going to continue going down the list here by going to our group bys. So the group by setting is, or group by tool, excuse me, is how the report is going to be broken apart. So if I jump back over to my data once more, you can see that I have some supervisor information, some job number information, and then I have a date. So let's say I wanted to group this report by date, meaning that every time there was a date change, it would start a new section for me in my report. So it doesn't have to be just one group by, it could be multiples. So for instance, I could group it by the supervisor and the date. And basically each time there was a new supervisor or a new date, the report is going to put a breakpoint in there and start a new section for you. So the group by allows you to break up your report so it's not just a long running list. So for example, I could say breakpoint by the supervisor name, and I can put another group by in there for the job number. Or actually, let's go with the date. So now this is going to group it by the supervisor name and by the date. I could add a third group by if I wanted to, but for this example, let's keep it simple. So next on to the most important step here. And the only other thing you need to know about group bys is you can sort them ascending or descending on the right-hand settings here once you've selected them. So the report data is actually where you're going to pick the fields that are going to be included in this report. So as you start out, you will notice on the left-hand side here, it will label all of the fields that were inside of your table. So back up here when we picked a form and we chose the employee hours table, what ended up happening was it put all of the table fields as well as those inputs that I selected for supervisor name, ID, region, all of that. It put all of those as available fields for me on the left-hand side here. So I can now come in here and add fields in. So I'm going to click on employee, the clock in time, the clock out time, and the total. So basically this report's going to have 4 columns, and it's going to have the first column is employee, it's going to have the clock in, the clock out times, and the total times for those employees. So by default, it's going to equally space the columns, but you can adjust these columns as you see fit. There's also some different appearance settings where you can show grid lines, put a border around headings, shade different rows, as well as sorting. So I'm going to sort by the employee name, so that way everybody's name appears the same in every group by. And you can choose it to be ascending or descending as well. One other thing that you can do with the individual fields inside of the table. So my total field here is a numeric value. So let's say that I wanted to sum up each section's total hours. I could come over here where there says footer type, and I can have a sum or a counter. And then it asks me if I want it to be by the group bys or by the report in total. So if I check those both on, basically what's going to happen is when there's the total column, every time that there's a group by, it's going to sum up that group of data for me. And then at the end of the report as well, it's going to give me a total count of all the hours of all of my employees. So while we go through here, we can actually preview the report up to this point, just like we can do with a form. So if I were to click on the preview here, you would see the report date of last week, January 14th to the 18th. You would see it's broken down by the supervisor name and by the date. And basically this whole section here would repeat itself every time there was a new supervisor or a new date. And you can see here it has my 4 columns and then my total here. So this total here is what I was referring to when we have the sum by the group bys of the reports. This is going to sum up that total column for me. And then at the bottom here, this is the report total. So, employee clock in time, clock out time, those aren't fields that we're reporting on right now. But let's say you had another numeric in there, or you wanted to count the number of employees, filled out a timesheet for that day. You can also use the counter option instead of sum to maybe count the number of employees that were in there. So let's go ahead and do that. So on the employee field, we have a counter, and I'm going to put that by the group by and by let's just leave that on the group bys. So now you can see that it's going to count the number of employees in that section for me, as well as the total. So you can play around with the group by and the report counters and sums for any of the fields that are inside of your report data area. And just keep in mind that anything that's available to you will be on the left-hand side here, and you can click them to add them in, and you can also move these fields around just like you would in the form builder. So continuing on the list here, we have the report footer. Same concept as the report header. So I'm just going to put this as a footer. Same concept in that you could have the date or the author or the page number on the left or right-hand side borders. You can also customize the appearance. So if I go and I preview this, here's my header, here's my footer, Here's my date range. Here is my group buys, and this is my table data here. And this is the counting and the sum of my total hours for my employees for that week. After the report footer comes the email schedule. So this email schedule, you have a couple of different options here. The report writer can create non-recurring reports where it's just a one and done and you need it right now and it just sends it to your email and you have it. It also has recurring emails for daily, weekly, or monthly. So each have its own set of settings that you kind of got to configure when you're going through them. So the first be, if you're doing a non-recurring report, you need to pick a date and a time that you want this report to execute. So let's say I wanted this to run at 1:20 in the afternoon. I can set my time zone, I can set daylight savings, and then I can come in here and put my email address that I want it to be sent to. It can be sent to multiple people. It can also be sent to email distribution chains. So for example, if you have, let's say employees@doforms.com, an email address that sends an email to every employee in DoForms. If I were to put that email chain in there, it would automatically forward that to everybody on that email chain. So you can send this report out to as many people as you'd like. You can also put an optional message inside of the body, as well as a customized subject line. So what most people will do in the subject line is they will put, the title of the report or maybe the date or something along those lines that makes it easy to identify what report it is that's coming through. Going down, before we go down to the different types, I just want to go over the recurring reports. So if I switch this to daily, same concept where I need to pick, instead of a date where it's going to run, it's a starting date. So I might not want these reports to start triggering until February 1st. And basically the system, even though it's a daily report, it's not going to go ahead and start generating those reports until I hit my start date. And then the time of the day is the time of the day that I want to receive the report. So let's say I wanted this to be at the 1st and I wanted it at 8:00 a.m. every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So now this setup here would basically every single day starting February 1st at 8:00 in the morning, it would run a report with this set of data instructions, meaning it would take, this date range. But if I was doing a daily report, I wouldn't want to use a custom date range. I would want to use like last week, this week, or use the last n days. So that way the data is constantly changing week to week or day to day. Because if I leave it with the custom date range here, this daily report is just going to give me the same data over and over and over again. But if this were to be last week, when this were to run Monday, it would be the last week from Monday. When it would to have run Tuesday, it would be the last week from Tuesday. So when you're going through, just make sure that your dates and your report types make sense. Same concept for the weekly, except you're going to choose a day of the week. Same concept with the starting date and the time of day. And it can be every Monday, every Friday, every Saturday, whatever you need. And then the monthly report has an additional setting where you need to put the day of the month. So not everybody's months end and start on the 1st and the 30th or 31st. So maybe you want this to be on the 5th of every month at 8:00 in the morning. You can receive this report. So you'd put in the day of the month that you want to receive it, and now every 5th of every month, I'm going to receive a report at 8:00 in the morning, and it'll just continue to run until I tell it to stop. But for this example, we're just going to do once. We're going to have it today, and then we are going to do 12:25 p.m. So the only other thing that you need to configure here is how you want your report to come in, either as a PDF or an Excel spreadsheet. So you can do either or. And then we have a report type. So the report type is a little bit tricky, and there's a little bit of information that you need to know about them. So the report layout is exactly how you see it in the preview here, where it has a whole structure. It has your header, your report date, your group buys, your table, your footer, all of that good stuff. A column layout, on the other hand, is strictly going to give you the column name, so employee, clock in, clock out, and total, on the top row of columns, and then it's just going to list them in a column view. Similar to if you had exported that information out of DoForms, it's not going to have any structure to it. There's no header, there's no footer, there's no group buys, none of that. It's just going to simply give you a column-based export that gives you all that information. Now, you might be asking yourself, why would somebody want to do that and not have the structure? And that brings us to this use a custom template option down here. So as you've probably heard in the past, DoForms has the capability to do custom PDFs and things of that nature using Excel. We also have the ability to do custom reports. So if you're somebody who is familiar with Excel and the different powers of Excel, be it pivot tables or macros or things of that nature, you can create a custom template where this column layout will give you the information in a set structure, column structure, and you can then run things like pivot tables or run a macro or run some sort of service inside of Excel that goes through and tailors that data and puts it in a report of your choosing. So this is really only for people who have some experience in Excel and creating complex reports in Excel. The column layout gives you just the raw data in a nice and easy format for you to then go in and kind of dissect it and put it in areas of your report as needed. But if you just want a standard report, just stick with the report layout, and that's going to give you your header, your footer, your table, just like you would see in this preview section here. So now if I went through and actually published this report, I would see in the schedule. So up here on the schedule, if I click on that button, it's going to give me the list of upcoming reports as well as hold on to my reports. So I created a report earlier this morning at 11:18 in the morning. So the DoForm system will hold on to this report for me inside of the system for 7 days. So basically until the 29th of this month, I can come into my portal and access this report by clicking on it. And it will download the PDF for me. And if I open it up, you can see my report date range. In this example, I grouped it by job number, supervisor name, and the date. And you can see as I go down, the job number and the supervisor name are the same here, but then the date changes to the 15th. So you can go down and see on the 14th, the 15th, the 16th, the 17th, all of the employees' clock in, clock out times, their totals. And then if I keep scrolling down the report here to see all of these different group bys, now we're on to job number 900 with me as the supervisor. If I keep scrolling down to the bottom here, we can see the total of all of my employees was 306 hours for this week. So you can do some kind of cool math within these reports to get you a total number of hours. You could see specifically a specific employee. If you went in and put a filter on Dan Miller for last week, you could see all of that employee's time. So there's a lot of different settings that you can go through and play around with to kind of get a report that looks like this. If I were to have chosen an Excel instead of a PDF, I would get the same exact layout, except it would be in an Excel format instead of a PDF format. So with that said, you can access these reports up to 7 days. So after the 29th, this name will still be here, indicating that I sent a report on that day, but it will no longer be clickable. But I can also scroll through the different upcoming months, and anything that I have scheduled will appear on this schedule for me to let me know when those reports are going to come in. And that's really all that there is to know about the report writer. Just keep in mind that if you choose a daily, a weekly, or a monthly date, the reports will not start to trigger until you choose a starting date. Once you choose a starting date, from that point forward, the reports will start to automatically kind of continue to come to your email address. And what you end up seeing after the report has been emailed is an email that comes through like this that says this report can be downloaded here. DoForms will keep this report for 7 days once you receive this email. And you can click on the here link as well to download it. But if I had gone in my email schedule section and put in an optional message and a custom subject line, those optional message and those subject lines would have came through, making it more easily identifiable for me to know what report is coming through. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, doesn't look like there's any questions. So thank you guys for coming out today on Mastering the Report Writer. Please stay tuned in the upcoming months for some more live coaching sessions on some different DoForms topics. Thanks. Bye.